How does a studio make one of the most acclaimed Xbox games of the generation, get publicly described by Xbox as a breakout hit, win awards across the industry, and then get shut down barely a year later? That is exactly what happened to Tango Gameworks, and the more you examine this story, the less it looks like one isolated business decision. It becomes a perfect example of what is broken about the modern game industry. Companies claim they want creativity, variety, and prestigious smaller games, but the moment those games cannot promise blockbuster returns forever, the people who make them become disposable. Tango eventually came back from the dead, but that does not erase what happened. A studio is not just a logo or an intellectual property on a spreadsheet. It is a group of people, relationships, and accumulated experience. Once you scatter that, you cannot simply press undo. So how did Xbox close one of its most interesting studios immediately after it delivered exactly the kind of game Xbox supposedly needed? Tango Gameworks was founded in Tokyo in 2010 by Shinji Mikami, the legendary director best known for helping create Resident Evil. ZeniMax Media acquired it later that year, bringing the studio under Bethesda. Its first major release was The Evil Within in 2014, followed by The Evil Within 2 in 2017. Neither became as commercially enormous as Resident Evil, but both established Tango as a studio with an identity. Then came Ghostwire Tokyo in 2022, an imperfect but striking supernatural action game built around a beautifully realized Tokyo. Tango was not just producing interchangeable corporate content, each game tried something different, and Mikami gradually stepped back to let younger developers lead. John Johannes progressed from working on The Evil Within to directing its DLC, The Evil Within 2, and eventually Hi-Fi Rush. That matters because when people later argue that Tango lost its value when Mikami left in 2023, they ignored the point of what he had built. Hi-Fi Rush was not directed by Mikami. It proved Tango could create new leaders beyond its famous founder. And Hi-Fi Rush was the moment everything appeared to click. In January 2023, Xbox announced and released it on the same day. No 6-year marketing campaign and no painfully vague teaser. It simply arrived on Xbox, PC and Game Pass, and it was brilliant. It was colourful, funny, and mechanically sharp. Its combat, animations, music, and environments moved to the beat at a time when major publishers were chasing bloated open worlds and live services. Hi-Fi Rush felt like a game made by people allowed to follow one great idea all the way to the end. Critics and players embraced it. It won Best Audio Design at the Game Awards and collected further recognition for its animation, sound, and music. Xbox marketing executive Aaron Greenberg publicly called it a breakout hit that succeeded across the company's key measurements and expectations. This was not only fans declaring it a success while Microsoft quietly disagreed. Xbox publicly presented Hi-Fi Rush as a success. The game even reached PlayStation 5 in March 2024. Then, on the 7th of May 2024, Microsoft announced that Tango Gameworks would be closed, just like that. The decision came amid wider cuts across Bethesda, Arcane Austin, and Alpha Dog Games were also closed. While Roundhouse Studios was absorbed into ZeniMax Online Studios, Microsoft described it as a reprioritization of titles and resources to focus investment on projects best positioned for success. But what does best position for success mean when you close the team that just made the surprise hit you publicly celebrated? What lesson was any Xbox developer supposed to take from that? Make a critically acclaimed game? Not enough. Win awards? Not enough. Create a new IP, keep the scope under control and improve the reputation of the platform? Apparently still not enough. The irony became ridiculous when an Xbox executive reportedly told staff after the closures that the company needed more smaller games capable of bringing prestige and awards. A former Tango project manager responded by posting Hi-Fi Rush's awards with 2 devastating words: not enough. Honestly, what else was there to say? Now, critical acclaim does not automatically mean commercial success. Hi-Fi Rush launched into Game Pass, so conventional sales could never tell the full story. It was shadow dropped with almost no advanced marketing, and Tango's earlier games were respected without becoming gigantic sellers. Krafton's CEO later admitted he did not know Microsoft figures and speculated that Hi-Fi Rush might not have produced a substantial return after costs. There was also a real leadership transition. Mikami had left, Tango was between projects, and its next game required more staff and investment. Matt Booty later called the closure a forward-looking decision, questioning whether the same leadership and team responsible for earlier success would remain in place. Those are legitimate business considerations, but they still do not make the decision sensible. Every development studio costs money between releases. Every new project is an expense before it becomes a product. If a team can deliver a successful original game and still be killed because preparing the next one requires hiring, success is no longer protection. It is only a temporary delay before the next spreadsheet review, and Mikami's departure should not have erased the achievements of those who remained. Again, Hi-Fi Rush was evidence that Tango could succeed without him directing. If Xbox thought that team lacked value, another publisher was about to disagree. 3 months after Microsoft announced the closure, Krafton, the South Korean company best known for PUBG, stepped in. In August 2024, Krafton announced a last-minute deal to acquire Tango Gameworks and the Hi-Fi Rush rights. Microsoft retained The Evil Within and Ghostwire Tokyo, separating Tango from 2 franchises it had created, but the studio name, part of its team and its newest IP, survived. Reports suggested that only around half of Tango's previous workforce initially made the transition. That is why calling it a perfect rescue would be misleading. People had already lost jobs or found work elsewhere. Momentum was broken and knowledge had walked out of the door. Krafton prevented complete extinction, but it could not undo every consequence of Microsoft's decision. Krafton's explanation was unusually honest. CEO Chang-Han Kim said the purchase was driven more by Tango's creativity and legacy than its financial results. He even said he did not expect Hi-Fi Rush 2 to be a guaranteed moneymaker. His argument was essentially that publishers still need teams willing to take creative risks because an industry obsessed with manufacturing guaranteed hits eventually produces nothing memorable. That should be obvious, yet hearing a major publisher say it felt almost radical. We also learned that Tango had already been working on an earlier version of Hi-Fi Rush 2 before its closure. Krafton later discussed ideas for more dynamic, somewhat more open experience with more advanced rhythm action technology. But here is the important current update. Tango has not officially announced its next game. The company relaunched as Tango Gameworks, incorporated under Krafton in 2025. Its Tokyo office reopened, it unveiled new branding and began hiring across several departments for an unannounced action game. Hi-Fi Rush also received a physical release in 2026. As of August 2026, however, there is no official title, gameplay reveal or release date for Tango's next project. Hi-Fi Rush 2 is the obvious possibility, but the studio has not confirmed that its current project is the sequel. So Tango is alive, but it is rebuilding. The logo survived, a meaningful part of the creative team survived, Hi-Fi Rush survived, but this is a second version of Tango, forced to reconstruct itself after an avoidable corporate demolition. Microsoft deserves some credit for eventually agreeing to sell Tango and Hi-Fi Rush rather than trapping both in a filing cabinet forever. Without that corporation, Krafton's rescue could not have happened, but allowing someone to rebuild the house does not absolve you of knocking it down. The situation exposed a huge contradiction in Xbox's strategy. Game Pass needs variety. A subscription service cannot survive on one giant release every few years. It needs smaller games, surprising games and titles capable of reaching audiences that obvious blockbusters cannot. Hi-Fi Rush demonstrated that perfectly. A distinctive new game that appeared without warning, generated enormous goodwill and gave Xbox something culturally exciting to discuss. Yet Tango was treated as expendable because modern corporations often value predictable scale above creative identity. Publishers say they want original ideas, but originality is risky. They say they want prestigious, smaller games, but those games are still forced to justify themselves inside companies spending billions on acquisitions. They buy studios for their talent, then manage them as collections of costs and assets. That makes Tango's story bigger than Tango. It tells developers that making a great game may not save their jobs. It tells players that supporting a release may not save its creators, and it tells every acquired studio that promises of creative freedom last only as long as corporate priorities remain convenient. Tango did not simply fail and disappear. It spent more than a decade creating flawed, fascinating, and increasingly confident games. It developed leadership beyond its famous founder and delivered one of Xbox's most acclaimed original releases. Microsoft then decided that the cost of Tango's future mattered more than the value it had already built. Krafton saw something worth saving and gave the studio another chance. Now Tango has to prove itself all over again after already proving itself once. And if its next game succeeds, the story will not be that Microsoft was right to close Tango. It will be that Tango survived a decision that should never have been made. Because the tragedy is not that Xbox failed to recognize a guaranteed billion-dollar franchise, it is that one of the world's largest companies apparently could not find room for a talented team making original games with an identity of its own. In an industry drowning in safe sequels, cancelled projects, and studios disappearing between releases, that is exactly the kind of team we cannot afford to keep losing.